Last time on Pixel Pilot, we flew out to the Red Sea to hunt down some cargo ships that were supplying weapons to the rebel militia on the Sinai Peninsula, which is part of Egypt. And even though we destroyed 2 of those cargo ships, more arms are making it to the rebels than the border forces can stop, and now rebel activity is at an all-time high. To make matters worse, Iran has sent part of its armed forces to support the rebels, setting up camps in direct violation of the demilitarized zone close to the Israeli border. The US is not cool with this, so the Marine Corps is being sent to attack at dawn just west of the city of Arish. It's a joint operation with the US Navy, which is where we come in. I'm part of a flight of 3 F-18 Hornets, and our job is to support the troops landing on the beaches. That purple light up there means it's time to start the jets. Thankfully, I have a little flashlight to help me see around the cockpit. I didn't know this when I first started out, and I used to just fumble around in the dark to try and start the engines that would eventually power on the cockpit lighting. Our wingman Smiley is having issues with his jet, but the clock is ticking and we can't just leave the Marines out there on their own, so my flight lead Thumper makes the call to launch. The cat shoots us into the inky abyss, but unlike last time, we pull off the K-2 departure without any issues. It's hard to show you on YouTube, but when you're in VR and you really feel like you're in the jet, it's such a special feeling when you break through the cloud layer and you see that beautiful dawn sky. It honestly blows me away that we get to experience these things in a home simulator. We regroup with Thumper and get a quick sippy sip of fuel to top up the tanks. The S3 tanker gives me anxiety because it's way harder than tanking off the bigger KC-130. Your margin of error is so much smaller and it can be really tricky to get it right, but this time we managed to pull it off. That's our target area just ahead of us. The rebels are fully active down there, so I'm setting up my countermeasures, which include those cool looking flares you see in those videos sometimes. I always forget to do this as part of my fence-in checks. I want to give you a sense of just how difficult it is to spot ground targets with the naked eye, especially when you know there are friendly units on the ground. The last thing you want to do is to drop a bomb on your own guys. I mentioned earlier we're actually a flight of 3 Hornets, but because our mission is set in the early 90s, tech was more limited back then, and only one of our jets would have had a fancy targeting pod on it. And when I say fancy, I mean fancy. Imagine a 150 kilogram super zoom lens with thermal imaging. The per unit cost of a Nighthawk targeting pod was $2.1 million back in 1995. That's roughly $4.3 million in 2024 terms. So anyway, Smiley's jet is the only one with the pod, and he's still on his way to the AO, so Thumper and I are just squinting out the window trying to spot things we can blow up. More out of desperation than anything, at one point Thumper suggests I fly down low to see if I can pick out a target with just my eyeballs. In hindsight, this was an extremely dangerous move because being at that low of an altitude makes you very vulnerable to attack, and I was just lucky to get away with it on this instance. Without a reliable way to acquire targets, our jets are kinda just there for show. Thankfully, the Marines do such a good job on the ground that they don't even really need us. I'm still carrying a couple of bombs at this point, and Thumper directs me to get rid of them rather than taking them all the way back to the carrier. What complicates things is they're 2 different types and it makes it difficult to launch them at the same time. Unsurprisingly, they're not the best hits, but with that done, it's time to go back to the boat. But first I've got to find my flight, which is easier said than done. See, our jets are so old that they don't even have GPS, relying instead on something called an inertial navigation system. It's actually pretty good at the beginning of each mission, but as time progresses, it gets more and more out of alignment until you recalibrate it. But to do that, you need to know the exact coordinates of a location, and I just didn't have that on hand at the time. So I'm dealing with contradictory information about where exactly Thumper and Smiley are located in relation to my jet, and it takes me a while to find them again. Once I do, I attempt a shit-hot Top Gun rejoin, but get way too low and way too slow, and violate the 2,000-foot minimum altitude and carrier-controlled airspace, which is a big no-no. Eventually, I form up with Thumper and Smiley, and this part is always cool, flying in formation through the stack above the carrier. We peel off into the break one by one with about a 15-second interval, and fly a short loop which spits us out just behind the boat. You can see by the position of this yellow ball relative to the green bars that I'm too low. I don't compensate enough. and it just keeps dropping lower and lower and lower until I get waved off or aborted. That means we do another happy lap of the boat and come back around for another attempt. We're low again, but this time we manage to catch it, but we overcorrect and end up too high. In my stubbornness, I cut the power and slam the jet down onto the deck at over 1,000 feet per minute. We're supposed to be aiming for about 700 feet per minute, so it's way too fast. Attempt number 3 goes very similarly, getting low, overcompensating, then throwing it down, WWE style, onto the deck, this time going over 1,100 feet per minute. The landing gear screams no more, and now we get to listen to its song of sorrow. I dial in the landing signals officer, or LSO, on the radio to inform him about my little predicament, and he asks me to fly past the boat so he can do a visual inspection, and he confirms it is indeed completely fucked. He instructs me to jettison any remaining weapons, which includes a very expensive Maverick air-to-ground missile on the right wing. However, there are several specific steps you have to go through to do this, including setting my old friend the master arm switch to on, and I simply cannot remember all of it right now. I ask for guidance over the radio, but I'm rapidly running out of time. The LSO tells me to look for a big yellow button with black stripes on it, which I later learned is called the Admiral's Doorbell, because if you do press it, you'll have a lot of explaining to do, and you'll likely never fly a fighter jet ever again. Not knowing this, I obediently smash that like button. So we kiss goodbye to the Maverick and 2 external fuel tanks, which you might assume are like the cheap gas bottles you get for your barbecue from the local service station. Wrong. These 3 items were worth so much money in the early 90s that you could have easily bought 3 houses for the same price. Attempt number 4. This time we start too high, and by now you know how much I enjoy overcompensating, so we let the jet sink like crazy before recovering the glide path at the last possible moment and touch down at a harsh but not frame-bendingly awful 830 feet per minute, catching the arresting wire and then DCS crashes. But hey, we did it. We may have cost the US Navy hundreds of thousands if not millions of dollars in damage and lost equipment, but we're not dead. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.